Hey, it's Clint. Welcome to Sweetcast. And I saw this not troll bleeding cool article. It basically just it's not much of an article, let's be honest. They just sort of recited what Jerry Conway said. So in this, so he's the creator of Punisher. Okay. So there was a question, I guess, posed. Jerry Conway, co-creator of The Punisher, Firestorm, Power Girl, Vixen, and Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, has something to tell us all on Twitter about what he would do if he would change. We're in charge of the comic book industry, but first, a little history. Okay, so and then it goes through the history. Basically, he gives the history of comics. So he wrote this article for Bleeding Cool, and in turn, I'm going to make a video off the same thing. So there you go. But this is actually interesting. So basically, he was saying he went through the history of how comics used to be for kids, and there was this assumption that they were only for kids. Those were the readers, and it was almost this rigid mindset. Now, that's not a bad thing. In writing, you generally have to understand your audience, and you're going to basically imagine who makes up your audience and write to those people. You're of course going to get people outside of that audience that read your stuff and are still going to enjoy it, and that's good. That's natural. What you don't want to do is get caught up on those outliers and then write your stories solely toward the outliers in hopes that there are more like them, because you're actually leaving your initial audience behind when you do that. Audiences evolve over time, and one of the examples he used was Harry Potter. Harry Potter was written for middle grade boys, essentially, and of course, are there girls that like it? Yes. Are there adults that like it? Yes. In some cases, too much. Uh, but people enjoy it, and over time, as the books came out, they actually sort of ramped up in their maturity level to sort of meet the audience that initially liked it. And so, but in a whole, they were still written for a middle grade audience, even though their audience aged. Now, in comics, things have gone a little bit differently. They have aged up along with their audience at some point, and in doing that, they didn't keep to the roots of still being for essentially middle graders. At least that's the argument here that Conway's making. And I think he has a point here. I think there is a good point in that boys, younger boys, have been left behind by the comic book industry. They're not still making books for them. Yeah, they could jump in. You're going to get some outliers, some boys that are going to get into comics. But, the big irony in all of this is that comics has been trying so hard to be inclusive through identity politics that they've actually left behind their initial market completely. First, it was through, sort of this maturing process. And then second, it was through not creating new books for younger readers. And there really, really is a lack of books for younger readers coming from, Marvel and DC. You can find some out there, but there are really not enough. I know because I've got a son who is 9 years old. He's almost he's going on 10, and I would love nothing more than to get him into comic books. But it has become kind of difficult because everything is so adult, which is strange because everything used to be geared directly toward kids. So I could get him some older stuff. He probably isn't going to understand some of the references, though, to be honest. And, a little old timey, perhaps. I don't know. We could try out some of that stuff. Still, here lies the problem. They're not replenishing their market base. All right, so let me read you a little bit of this. He says, to state the obvious, the comic book publishing is in serious trouble. So if you say that, are you a bigot? All right. With a business model that almost literally has no future. Yet comic books are a source of intellectual property for exploration in all sorts of popular media and have never had greater potential. Why is this? Why do comics as a storytelling form, superhero and otherwise, have such an enormous impact on popular culture, but comic book publishers are struggling to survive? Why are publishers almost universally failing to succeed at actual publishing? My basic answer is they're pushing the wrong market, and they've been doing so with increasing desperation since the late 1970s. And I think that there have been waves. I'm going to add to this. I think he's right here, but they've been adding to this with different waves. They've realized that they're not replenishing their reader base, and so they've basically said that their initial market, the same younger boys, generally speaking, that grew up reading comics and got into them, kept reading them when they were older and are still interested in them, they're still going to be around no matter what they do. And so they've basically ignored that audience, and they're banking on or assuming that their support is going to continue. At the same time, they've turned to find a new audience, and that new audience is an imaginary woke Tumblr teenager or something like that. That I don't really understand why, but that's the audience that they've gone for. And nowhere in that do you see young boys, who used to be the primary market. That was when they were selling so many comics, was when mid-grade boys were reading comics. It's just the truth. All right, so let's put aside the incredible business stupidity of depending on a single distribution method. Again, this, for some reason, today has become bigoted, as if you say it. The problem is bigger. The defined audience for mainstream comics is an audience that, by definition, constantly shrinks because people are dying and they're not adding to their readership. And the woke Twitter teenager, it just doesn't exist for comics. Again, this is an example of going to an outlier. Yes, you've got some of those woke teenagers out there, I presume, that are into comic books, but they're an outlier and they liked comic books as they were. They still, you're still trying to chase this golden goose that doesn't exist when you've already proven that you had an audience. For a variety of self-enforcing reasons, publishers have defined the primary audience for mainstream comics as, in effect, long-term fans and potential collectors. Those are two different archetypes of fans, and I always like to do this when you're talking about selling anything, but comics is one of those things. Long-term fans and potential collectors. What they don't have in that bunch is new readers and really defined specifics on how they're going to find those new readers. Hence, fan-oriented navel-gazing, continually triannual events, reboots, collector-oriented variant covers, etc. And I would also put that the price of comic books, because they're so focused on collectors, just goes up and up and up. So he, again, some good points, talks about jumping on points. I think that jumping on points could happen. But honestly, when you are talking about younger readers, newer readers that could potentially be longtime readers, you've got to make it a lot more accessible for them. And comics are really not that accessible. It is super intimidating to get into. You could say just pick up any issue and start reading. But really, if you don't have any clue as to what's going on, it's just not nearly going to be as fun. Like, you got to have, a nice entry point and an ending point, and you know what I mean. I don't know, continuity. I get it. Like, if you're a longtime reader, you want continuity to be respected. At the same time, there has to be some kind of newer continuity or some kind of faded, tapered continuity. I don't know what you would call it, but you got to do something so that new readers have a very easy way to get into it and read it. This is really how the comics industry has excluded new readers, because it takes an awful lot of effort to get caught up and to figure out what's going on, to get oriented. Publishers, of course, will disagree with this analysis and say that they're always trying to provide rampons to new readers. Again, Rampons' number one issues and starting points are not the same thing. Not at all. Oh, not at all. Number one issues are really a ploy for collectors. I don't think anybody is confused by this. They're for collectors. They're to sell comics. They're not actually for new readers getting into something, because you still have to have some understanding of what happened before in order to get onto those new ramping on points. I think they could do a much better job of that. But any serious look at what they're offering in mainstream reveals a decided tilt. In fact, a massive tilt toward privileging the existing readership. I would say maybe I agree with the continuity exists, but not as far as the marketing exists, and not as far as new books that they're putting out exists. Uh, I'd say they're trying to do the same thing. They had a readership of middle grade boys. They moved along, they matured, and then now they were going after collectors and longtime readers, and now they're saying they're always going to be here. They're always going to be our readers. So let's instead focus our attention elsewhere on this third group. They're doing it again, and they're going to keep doing this over time. And it's probably because they saw an initial reward. As they sort of aged things up, they saw a reward because their audience was aging. They were maturing. They were interested in reading these things. They saw a reward when they moved to wokeness because they got sales. They got mainstream news attention, and you were getting people that normally weren't buying comic books, buying what America #1. They were buying Ms. Marvel #1. They were buying these books because they seemed, at least at face value, to be notable. That's why they were buying them, because it was a gimmick, not because they were getting into it and becoming a new reader. And the sales numbers reinforce this. Let's see, it continues. And this makes sense in a way because of a cultural shift in the editorial direction of the publishing houses that can be traced back to the era I'm from, the late 1960s. All right, so he goes on to tell a story about how they used to do tours of DC Comics, and he went when he was 14, and he had a fanboy moment where he said something that he would hope would happen in the next issue, something like that. Green Lantern story. Okay, he had a fanboy moment, and he was speaking to, who's this, Julie Swartz, and Julie said, "How old are you?" Mind you, this is a woman. Okay, she said, "How old are you?" He said, 14. Julie, is Julie a man? He snorted. I don't know. Julie Swartz is a man. I'm confused. Uh, People that know lots about comics, you can correct me. I'm not going to edit that out. I don't care. All right. So he snorted, "You're too old. You're not my reader," and he walked off. Julie Swartz. It's like a man named Sue, I guess. "You're too old. You're not my reader," and he walked off. This is an assumption that outliers are not the readers, or it's a misunderstanding of where readers are. But again, that's just explaining how things ramped up, and then it's also in turn explaining how they're misinterpreting their audience today, as they're constantly looking for new readers. All right, he says, I later learned that DC, and also at Marvel in the 60s, the commonly accepted view is that the comic book readership was a kid. Okay, they get it, between 9 and 13. All right. And then it changed. So here's what he says is the solution. I don't know how you go from that to this, but here we go. This is, to me, I disagree with this so much. He says, this is his prescription. I'd cancel every existing superhero comic book and publish a limited new line for middle grade readership, simplify characters and storylines, and eliminate every event that requires more than passing familiarity with the basic simplified continuity, 10 to 15 titles. So I like the idea of simplifying superhero titles. I don't know that you need to cancel all superhero books. Simplify things or make a whole new line. You can keep doing the stuff that's selling. Obviously, you got to cancel crap that doesn't sell. Keep doing the stuff that's selling for your existing readership. Make a new line. You can still do superhero books. Kids like superheroes. They like the idea of superheroes. Do a superhero book, but I like the idea of making it simplified, making the continuity matter less so. Spanning over years and years and years. Make it again, restart fresh, and keep that reader in mind, and then see what happens. He says for existing readers, I'd offer separate higher price graphic novel line. I don't know if they're buying floppies, they're buying floppies. And apparently those are selling better than graphic novels right now in general. But whatever, I can forgive that. But this would be separate, not monthly, not in the mainstream. Okay, continues, and I do everything possible to get monthly comics into supermarkets. I'm not sure that that's a good idea. I'm not. The only example I have to go off of is Allegiance Arts. They're selling books in Walmart, and that's probably a pretty good indicator. I have no idea what their sales are. I have no idea if they're publicly recorded anywhere. I have no idea to really tell if it's effective or if it's growing over time. Any of that, I don't know. I hope that that information comes out in the future because I think that would be very valuable, not just to Allegiance, but it would be very valuable to the entire comic book industry at large. My guess is, I don't know. I'm suspicious that it would be great because they're already publishing. DC Comics is reprinting. They're doing books, graphic novels through Walmart, and it doesn't seem like those were doing fantastic as it was. So I don't know. I'd sort of challenge that supermarket idea. He says in movie theaters and Walmart, Target, Costco offer subscription services through Amazon. That makes a little bit more sense to me. A subscription service, because if you look at any kind of new product, especially that's targeting this younger demographic, they're not going to movie theaters and Walmart and Costco. Maybe they're a little bit, but especially during a pandemic, the internet is the way to go. So how do you reach them through the internet? Not only that, but how do you compete with all the other things like video games? There's a whole lot to take in there. Pursue every alternative distribution avenue. I get like the point here is that the current distribution model sucks. It doesn't work. A lot of people are unhappy with it. It's not that it hasn't worked. It has worked. It's just that it's declining because of these other problems that they have with getting new readers and convincing them that it's a good idea to go to a comic book shop and buy books. All right. The present course taken by the major publishers is a dead end. Does this make him a bigot for saying this? How, it's like if you're the wrong person, you can't criticize the industry. Some people are allowed to, but others aren't. It's just the weirdest thing. They're pursuing the wrong readership. That's what he says. There's a bigger audience out there. We just have to welcome them. And you have to hunt for them. You have to go out of your way to find them. It's not just going to be this passive. If you think about it, how lazy the industry has gotten, and that they set up specific shops for comics that were specialized toward customers that were especially going to buy their books. I mean, that's really cool, but it made things a whole lot more convenient for Diamond and for publishers. It made things more inconvenient over time for readers and new readers, and they've made their material, their stories, much more inconvenient for new readers, and they're focusing on the wrong audience. So that essentially sums it up. Thank you all for watching the video. Don't forget to back Fatal. I should have posted this at the beginning of the video, but we're at $64,000. Look at that. We jumped up a few more backers there. Help us get to 65,000. We really want to hit that 70,000 so I can give you all those printing upgrades. And I'm not going to lie, we're going to see what can we do to push this thing to get to $100,000. That would be phenomenal. A huge thing for us, up and coming creators. So I appreciate all your support. Help us get there, and I will see you in the next video.